Right, good evening and welcome. Welcome to those of you who will be watching this later as well, recording. We're going to introduce our special guest in just a minute. Next week, we've got Dr. David Payton, who's a researcher who's been doing some research in the area of sex education. He's got some absolutely fascinating findings to discuss with us next week. As usual, if you haven't signed up for our conference yet, do follow through and sign up for that. It's pinned to the top of the Facebook page. You'll find it in the YouTube video descriptions. So that's our conference, 14th of November online. It's a Saturday. We've got a great lineup of speakers, a lot of really interesting people to listen to. You can do that from the comfort of your own home. So do have a look at our conference. Now, as I would say with the live stream, we're really keen to have on people to come on and disagree with us. So if you know anyone or can suggest anyone or suggest to anyone that they might like to come on and take the other side of an argument on one of the issues that we discuss, then that would be great. In Scotland, it seems really difficult to find people to come along and engage in open debate. But if you can help with that and find someone, that would be fantastic. Just a few things I've been working on in the background that will be coming out on YouTube. Soon I'm going to make a video about the General Teaching Council for Scotland's new professional standards that go beyond merely demanding that teachers accept a social justice ideology. And they've now added in intersectionality to it, just so they can keep up to date with the latest sort of left liberal progressive thinking and impose that on the teaching profession in Scotland. I'm also going to do something about the global citizenship assessment. Scotland's entered this international league table that basically sees how well you indoctrinate your pupils. And John Swin is delighted that at last he's found a league table that Scotland can perform well in. And this is the one. So I'm going to look at the sort of questions that are involved in that to see what this is really measuring and see whether it's something we should be really proud of. And the other thing I'm going to be talking about very soon is about the ethics of lockdown from a sort of philosophical perspective. So I think I've got some things, well, I don't know if they're original, but I haven't heard anyone else say them in any case. So I'll be making a video about the ethics of lockdown within the next few days as well. Right, during the course of this evening's live stream, do comment, and you can share it on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook as well, so other people will be able to join in and see what's happening. Right, this evening's special guest is Dr. Stuart Waiton. A lot of you will have come across Stuart before. He's a social commentator, writes a column in the Herald quite often. Varied academic interests, has been involved in the No to Name Person campaign, the campaign against the smacking ban, and now the campaign against the hate speech legislation as well. So welcome to Dr. Waiton. Good to have us with you.
Yeah, thank you.
From up in Dundee. Tell us a little bit about your academic background, your academic interests.
Well, it started, I was a youth and community worker in Adrian Court Bridge, and it was around the time that New Labour were coming into power, and they introduced a child curfew, which, as far as I can tell, was the first curfew that had been introduced since the Second World War. And I was concerned about this. So I was I'd set up a youth charity called Generation Youth Issues, which was concerned about the over-regulation of youth, but also moved on to look at the issue of child safety and the kind of obsession around child safety and the potential dangers of this, what you could call an obsession, a societal obsession. And then I did a PhD looking at the rise of the antisocial behavior order. And a lot of this, I suppose, a lot of it was to do with a sense that the state was starting to move in and professionals were starting to move in and regulate more and more areas of life. So, for example, for the antisocial behavior stuff in the child curfew framework, my concern there wasn't that people didn't necessarily have genuine concerns, but it was more that what seemed to be happening was that certain fears and anxieties were leading to more and more police measures. So rather than communities having a sense that they can do things themselves. So if there's a noisy neighbor, perhaps you can talk to your noisy neighbor. If there's a child misbehaving, perhaps you can do something. The state seemed to come in and say, in fact, I can even remember a poster, a kind of government or local authority poster that said, if antisocial behavior is happening, pick up a weapon, and it was a telephone. So you meant to pick up the phone. And so it felt like people were just being encouraged to phone the police or phone the community warden or phone the council or this body, phone more and more people to deal with things that had historically been seen as nuisance behavior. So that was my kickoff. And then from there, I suppose I've remained interested in the if you like, the at-risk society, in a sense that society in all different areas has got this problem of risk and danger, which relates to some extent to the COVID stuff. But I suppose fundamentally the main thing that interests me at the minute is the concept of vulnerability, which I think has become fairly all-encompassing, so that more and more people, and arguably universally, we're now perceived as being vulnerable and in need of protection. And the problem with that, which is what I'm trying to always write about, the problem is that the more vulnerable we think of ourselves as and other people as, the more likely we are to criminalize more areas of life. So to criminalize language, for example, because language is now seen as something that hurts us, because we're perceived as vulnerable. Words hurt, therefore you need to criminalize language. And it's almost all the new problematic laws seem to start from this premise that we should perceive people as being vulnerable and in need of protection. And that, to me, is the new role of the state. The state and the police now see their job as protecting the vulnerable. So I suppose that is what I am obsessed by.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we should go. This wasn't the topic we planned to talk about first, but we should jump to this because it's very relevant to what you were just saying. And that's the Scottish government's proposed redefinition of child abuse. Now, this is something I highlighted a couple of years ago, 18 months ago, when I found it buried away in some dark recess of the Scottish government's website. And it basically, as far as I'm aware, has received virtually no publicity at all. There's been no political controversy over it. And yet, as far as I can see, this is worse than the named person scheme, and it's worse than the smacking ban. Because with the named person scheme, one of the problems with that is it lowered the bar for state intervention in family life. It took it from abuse or neglect, it was pretty serious stuff, and brought it down to well-being concerns. Whereas this redefinition, this almost takes well-being concerns and turns those into abuse. So this is not just justifying state intervention. This is classing things as crimes that are really, way away from things you'd normally think about as abuse. So I thought we could talk through some of these. I've got the list here, and we can see what we think about them. So in the government's document, it says this. It says examples of behaviours that are commonly accepted as constituting emotional abuse follow. This list is not intended to be prescriptive or exhaustive. In other words, they're going to think of lots more as well, but is included to illustrate the level of seriousness of the behaviour that we consider should be reflected in any revised offence. In other words, these things should constitute child abuse. Right, the first one, terrifying. Right, to threaten a child or someone the child loves with physical violence. Okay, well, smacking ban's been and gone, I suppose. Abandonment or death, fair enough. Okay, threatening to kill kids, you're not supposed to do that. So we're okay with that. The adult may threaten the child verbally. They may yell, scream, or curse, or use other tactics to intimidate or terrify the child. So in other words, shouting at the child, effectively what they're saying, would be classed as child abuse. How's that going to work out?
You want me to comment on that?
Uh-huh.
Yes. Well, again, do you know? Because I was looking at that document. Has it been passed yet? Is this?
No, this went out to consultation.
Yeah.
And there were responses to the consultation. Usual story. All the sock puppet charities saying, yeah, they think it's great. Maybe, move this comma from here to here or whatever. There were some organizations, individuals raising concerns. But I would say not as fundamental as the concerns need to be. But basically, I think it's going under the radar.
Yeah. There's
no campaign against it. There's no political opposition to it. There's no media attention to it. It's just sliding through the background. And maybe people think it's just too hot to touch. I mean, who would want to be associated with, you'd seem like you're the people who are trying to, I don't know, you must be the pro-child abuse campaigners if you're against the new child abuse legislation.
It's a genuine problem, because this was similar with the anti-smacking campaign. So if you look at it was the be reasonable campaign. So it was the idea of reasonable chastisement, and of course it's quite difficult to get people to do much about it, because it's as if what you are saying is, I think I'm this pro smacking person, right? I'm for smacking, right? And nobody's really for smacking. People might think it's entirely up to the parents what they do, but that doesn't mean that it's like nobody walks down the street with I believe in smacking t-shirts, or waves a banner. So it's a problem. So, and I think similarly, this is something similar in terms of, well, what are you saying? That abuse is all right. It's all right to abuse children. Yep. And it's particularly difficult in terms of what I was talking about before, in terms of this category of vulnerability, because children are just categorized now as vulnerable, right? And that's just an accepted framework. And you think about, I was thinking about this also in terms of the poverty, the child poverty discussion and all this stuff. Because I was trying to explain it to my students last week. I was trying to think of a way, how do I explain that? Because children just seem vulnerable, right? It seems reasonable to say children are vulnerable. But actually, if you just think about it historically and think back to, like a Sherlock Holmes movie with the kids in the street, right? Or Oliver Twist and, the kids, Fagin's little kids, or you think about the Glaswegian kids that you got all these pictures of these Glaswegian kids in shorts that are scruffy playing in the dirt and all the rest of it. They were all poor, right? And lived in really much more difficult circumstances than children do now. But you didn't think of them as vulnerable, right? That's not your image of these children. They were cheeky, they were lively, they were, they didn't have much money and all the rest of it. But this idea of the vulnerable child as the essence of what they are is a newly constructed image. And the thing is, once you have that, once that's kind of set in place, then, well, what's going to happen? They're going to be vulnerable to more things. And so what are you saying? Are you saying it's all right to scream and shout at a child, to terrify a child? Is that good parenting? Is that what you're saying? And straight away you're on the defensive.
The smacking ban.
It does.
With the smacking ban, I find people would be so aggressive, and I'm sure some people, they were absolutely genuine when they would say, I can't believe I've actually met someone who's trying to defend smacking. I can't believe that someone like you, somebody says, and you point out, the majority of the population agrees. That's so often the case in Scotland. You say something that the majority of the population agrees with, but you're made to feel as though you're like on the lunatic fringe of the spectrum of opinion when you say it. I mean, this shouting thing, the thing with these is the kids will be taught about it. So you'll have, if this passes as it is, which I imagine it was, so kids will be taught at school, it's a criminal offense if someone shouts at you. So if you wind up mum or dad or teacher or whatever, and they get annoyed with you and raise their voice or shout at you, whatever, then, this is, you can phone the police or come and tell us about it at school. we'll see what we can do. I mean, cursing. I mean, if a parent happens to swear at a child, okay, not great, but is that a criminal offence?
Yeah.
And some people are just in the habit of swearing left, right, and centre. They swing from rage to warmth to rage. I mean, probably a lot of parents would just think that sounds like a normal Monday morning for me. Right, the next one. I'm sorry to have to mention this. It's quite shocking. Ridicule the child.
Yeah.
Child abuse.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, it is interesting that you raise this in terms of how this will play out, because it's like a lot of these things. In fact, I think you made the observation about the street preachers, that the street preachers aren't actually breaking a law, but they get arrested anyway, and the punishments in the process, because you'll just keep arresting them, which is a very good point, and there's a lot of truth in that. And again, here you think, well, how is this actually going to play out? Because I suspect they won't necessarily be, I'm not sure teachers will not have knowledge of this or think about it and all the rest of it. But what will happen for sure is that if you've got a family that's on the borderline, then this will be used against that family in terms of whether that child should be taken away or not. That's when it becomes, and that's when it becomes most horrific. Yeah. And that's when it also becomes, it's one of the frustrating things about these kind of modern elites and this kind of professional class who live in this bubble. As you say that you defend smacking and their heads nearly fall off. Yeah, and you think, well, where have you been? Well, who do you mix with? It's like this is not abnormal behavior, and you might not love it, but it's not as if you're just whatever. It's the extremity in their heads, which is remarkable. So again, I think it's a little bit of a bubble existence that they have, that they make these things up, and then how it pans out is that it'll be used against the poorest sections of society more than anybody. Yeah, and that's one of the things that grates with me is a lot of these people think they're left wing, and they think that they're radical and on the side of the people and on the side of the poor and all the rest of it. Well, it's going to be the poor parents who are going to be having their kids taken off them because of these sort of initiatives. The
people who come up with this, their own persona is so gentle. I mean, they're like in person-centered counselor mode in all conversations. Yeah. And to the point that a lot of people would find their persona a bit odd, really. They're a bit flat and whatever. But then they think that's the way you're supposed to be with children, and so they're judging people. And then you get people from maybe a bit of a rougher background. People just don't talk like that. They're a bit more rough and ready, and they're horrified by that. So there will be horror story cases. And the other thing that'll be happening is teacher says something to kid in class who's not doing the work, whatever. Something that's just a bit sarcastic or whatever, and it's going to be, "Are you ridiculing me?" And the teacher will think, "Oh, hang on, that's child abuse," and the pupil will be thinking, "I've got you on the back foot now." And that's the thing that will probably never come to a head. There's probably not going to be cases brought, but it just undermines the authority of the teachers. It just gives the children that bit more strength in their own confidence in their own standing. Yeah. That you'd really better be careful the way you deal with me, otherwise I'm going to get you on this. Yeah. Okay,
it's profoundly distrusting, isn't it? That's one of the. It's kind of one of the hallmarks of these type of policies, is that they have such a desperately poor opinion of people. It's like, because I'm sure a lot of these people that are introducing this, they will have shouted at their child, right? Unless they're kind of like some weird angelic person. They will have shouted at their child, but they're not really talking about themselves, they're not, but they're talking about other people, the people, and it's that sense of a vision of parents in particular, and such a horrible, negative, destructive, where everything becomes abuse. And the term abuse, again, it's another it's a category that's just developed and developed over the last 25 years, so that almost anything that would have been seen as, you know, a bit unpleasant or not very nice is now abuse, and that very term carries with it real moral weight. You know, it's a sense of damage, real damage, real harm.
This is alongside threatening death.
Yeah,
it's all on the same list.
Yeah,
with these people.
Yeah,
and let's move on. Right, other forms of child abuse that the government's proposing. To reject a child, with whatever, to push them away. To push a child away is child abuse. That's what they think. To make them feel that they are useless or worthless. I mean, how could anyone possibly judge that? So it's based on the child's feeling. So if the child says, I was made to feel useless, then that's it. That's child abuse. Because the offense is to make them feel useless. So if the child says that made them feel useless, then the person who did it is a child abuser. So if I happen to be the maths teacher saying, oh, actually, I think you've got these ones wrong. Let me show you. You're making me feel useless. I mean, it's from a parallel universe. Listen, people who write this and think, yep, that's a good, nailed down, accurate definition of something that constitutes child abuse.
Yeah.
What are they thinking?
Well, it was interesting what you were saying before, though. The way these people speak, that you know, the kind of it's like they're a kind of therapist on dope or something. Like kind of, you know, sort of constantly, permanently calm, empathetic. Yeah. I mean, I must admit there would be nothing that would drive me more mad either as a child or an adult than to have that sort of person parent me or anything else. And I've never quite been able to work out how to argue it, but you know, I think there can be a real argument about there's a need for children to experience human emotions of their parents. You know, to actually recognize that their parents, you know, are people who get angry, who get sad, who sometimes react badly, and you know, that's part of life, is to understand the human condition. And if you were brought up by these people, right, in this kind of like really strange, permanently empathetic, it's fake, you know, it's false, it's so empty of so much of humanity. You know, and how you actually develop real bonds and relationships is through highs and lows and emotional anxieties, and you know, that's a really important aspect of childhood. And I just think if you had a child brought up by this kind of comatose human being, you'd think, God, that's a dreadful childhood.
Yeah, I think what he says is absolutely right. That part of learning about human relationships is learning that people get angry, and learning that if you treat people in certain ways, they get angry with you. And if you don't learn that, if you learn that, you know, you can, you know, tell people to F off and just fail to comply with whatever, and just don't do what you're supposed to do, that no one ever gets angry. It's always just, you know, can we talk about this? Then that's a bad life lesson. You're going to expect everyone through life to act like that, but that's not human nature. But then simultaneous with that, we've got the kids getting the opposite message. How are you feeling? Tell us about your emotions, because that's really important. How are you feeling? Well, at the same time, expecting adults to have no emotions. I mean, it's the recipe for narcissistic, self-centered, self-obsessed young people, isn't it? But
yeah, it is. Yeah, and I think we're seeing some of the results of that, unfortunately.
It makes someone feel that they're worthless. I mean, how subjective can you get? Right, how about this one, another form of child abuse? The adult may seem irritated by the existence of the child. I mean, could you imagine a jury, you know, deciding if the adult seemed irritated by the existence of the child? I don't normally like to say this sort of thing, but you've got to question the competence of the people writing this, just to suggest that could be a crime. Make the child feel that their opinions, views, or feelings are worthless. Make them feel that their opinions, are worthless. I mean, that's not far off not doing what they want, isn't it? I mean, how do you make someone feel their opinion's worthless? Well, you don't do what they want. You don't do what they ask for. So that would make parents and teachers generally feel on the back foot. That when the kid expresses an opinion about what they would like or like to do, then really, you're skating on thin ice if you're going to go against that.
Yeah, I mean, the difficult with all these things, you see, is that their starting point, which which is why they have this kind of empathetic persona, is this sense of emotional fragility. That's their starting point of how they understand people, right? And that's everybody. That's so they perceive, and so if there are adults who do bad things or drink too much or whatever it is they do, they'll understand that as some sort of emotional harm that's being developed. So the whole of the world is explained through a kind of very narrow psychological emotional prism. And so everything you're saying, you shout at a child, well, they hear you saying that and say, well, actually, you're scarring that child. You are damaging that child. Every single thing you're saying, and we can see that image. And I mean, I'm almost thinking, how would you answer that? How would you answer that? Even though this stuff's just not, it's nothingness in terms of the realities of life. But increasingly, the realities of life are understood through this prism. And so that's why that's the logic. The logic is, if you ridicule a child, that's you have an image in your head of the vulnerable child. That child is being damaged. It's being damaged by the parents. And the thing they'll often say is, it's not just the once, it's the repeat. It's that you keep doing it. You keep doing it. It's the idea that all a parent does is just like come in and constantly like ridicule a child. It's like your mission in life or something. But so it's quite difficult because that's the framework that they have, is this absolute sense of childhood fragility, and emotional fragility in particular. And that's why you end up getting documents like this being produced, because it just falls out the head. It's entirely logical. You need to cuddle a child. If you cuddle a child, then we'll stop crime in the future, because that's the basis of crime, is etc. It's in all of these sort of documents.
Yeah. This make a child feel that their feelings are worthless. It's like doubly subjective. Feel that their feelings are worthless. Just going back to the ridicule thing. I mean, you could imagine a situation where you've got a parent who, for whatever reason, just like ridicules the child morning after. Every interaction with the child is ridiculing them. Okay. I mean, if they wanted to make that clear that that's the sort of situation they're talking about, they could have done that here. But they haven't. They said, to illustrate the level of seriousness, ridicule the child. That's it. No additional qualification required. Right, on to the next section. Corrupting children. Tolerate or encourage inappropriate or illegal behavior. Okay, that's maybe okay. Expose the child to antisocial role models. So if Uncle Alan's a bit of a wild one, drinks a bit too much and whatever, expose the child to antisocial role models. I mean, what if someone in the family, what if Big Brother is not a great role model at the time? So who's the child abuser? Does that make the parents a child abuser? I mean, where do you start? Expose a child to anger. Expose a child to anger. In other words, get angry in the presence of a child. Not even angry with the child. They're just exposed to anger. That's like we were saying earlier, taking it even further. The adult may reward the child for substance abuse. It's quite hard to imagine what they've even got in mind there. Or bigotry. Reward the child for bigotry. I mean, can you even imagine what they've got in mind there? I'll give you $5 if you'll go and sing some sectarian song.
Well, I mean, actually, it's if you're if you're a strongly racist person and your child says something racist, and you'll say, "Yeah, you're right, son." Right? They're saying that that's child abuse. Now, I'm against racism, but as far as I'm aware, at least not yet, racism in and of itself isn't a criminal thing. It's a thought, right? And it's a thought that needs to be challenged, but it is a thought. So you're basically saying if you don't bring up your child in a politically correct way, you're a child abuser.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that sounds like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is, it's kind of, I'm not even sure if Joseph Stalin went this far in terms of in terms of expectations of being able to determine what a family does and doesn't do. I mean, it's
so do you agree with my point that this is like smacking ban on steroids? This is 10 times worse than the smacking ban.
Well, it depends how they implement it, but yes, it's horrendous. I mean, I don't know how they're going to use this, and I mean, if they start to use it in a way that becomes public knowledge, again, they could be in a lot of trouble, because this would not be seen as acceptable by the vast majority of people in this country. So yeah.
Well, there we go. Hopefully it will come out and become a public debate, but no sign of it so far.
Yeah,
it will have to become a bill to pass, so that maybe it will get some media attention then. Yeah. Okay, right. That's fascinating. That's a good look at that. Right, another issue I was going to bring up is the Scottish Family Party. We made a little promotional video recently. We hadn't really done something like this before, and it featured a young lady. I think she was Nigerian heritage. I don't know, a black young lady in any case. You remember the Scottish Family Party. So we published this on YouTube, etc. When we put it on YouTube, the first comment up was "F off, back to Africa." So we deleted that. I mean, that's some unpleasant character coming on. But then after them, we've got a few comments on the lines of, "Why are you pushing multiculturalism at us? Why have you chosen a black person? What are you trying to say?" Well, that sort of thing. It's though people are assuming that, the National Council of the Scottish Family Party had a meeting, and we said, right, our strategy needs to be, we need to get a black person in our promotional video. That's the way forward. That's what we want to do. But in fact, it wasn't like that at all. I mean, this young lady volunteered. She said, if you want me to help with the video, I'd be happy to do that. And I thought, yeah, you'd be really good at that. So we went ahead. But people see it in that way. So when they see a black face, they come out. They're offended is not the word, but they're bringing objections. They're a bit upset about it. But I thought, on the other hand, when people assume that this must have been some deliberate decision, well, if they know the Scottish Family Party, they should know that it isn't. But on the other hand, in wider society, it often is. So has this sort of response, is it an inevitable response to the culture that we live in?
Yeah, it's a problem, isn't it? Because what's so tragic about the elevation of race by the kind of leftist, liberal anti-racists is that people start to feel as if they're having this rammed down their throat. So you like every second newsreader is black, for example, right? Or if you watch Match of the Day or any of the sports programs, they have to have at least one black player, it seems, or more than one, hopefully. And it's repeated in sort of most areas. So, the soaps will make sure that they've got enough gay people and black people. And actually, I think there was some study about the television and found that television actually has, it's something like that, 23% of people on television are of a group, So the reason that, I mean, some of the people that react might be racist, but I think the majority of people react, it's because they feel as if they're being patronized. Yeah, they're they're being socially and culturally engineered. Here's you stupid person. Black people are nice as well. Here's another black person to show you that black people are nice. And the tragedy of it is that, as far as I can tell, racism has declined so significantly that if they didn't do any of this stuff, we wouldn't even notice anymore. We wouldn't notice the color of their skin because it would be irrelevant, because there would just be us. There'd just be people. And that's what's so sad about it, is they've actually made a situation that could have been a situation where where we can all just have a laugh. We can take the mick out of each other. We can crack any joke about anybody because none of it has got any bad meaning associated to it, where people genuinely just relate to each other openly and freely and all the rest of it, which is the situation you want. And they've managed to racialize society. They've re-racialized it, in a different way, and it's incredibly divisive, unhelpful, and it gets people's backs up, and I think that's why people probably reacted the way they did.
Yeah, I mean, it's really unfortunate. So in the situation where a blackface appears like that, I mean, they're going to see that personally as well. Then you're going to get this negative reaction, which is really, really unpleasant. And then, then that would make some organizations think maybe we shouldn't put a blackface on. But again, it brings the issue in where you want it to be a non-issue. But I think this is something where it just seems like it's been pushed harder and harder. The Scottish Parliament certainly seems determined to bring race more and more into the centre of Scottish politics. So I think we're going to have more and more of this problem. But I think as the Scottish Family Party, I find it quite interesting seeing that. So even though we're so clear on our line on this, I mean, anyone who knows anything about us would know that would be the last thing we would be, having our quotas for different groups of people. But we're absolutely against all of that. But still, even for us, you find yourself encountering these issues. And I think with the race issue in particular, I see it only getting worse in the future. With the Black Lives Matter debates, it's interesting, the UK Conservatives have said basically it's illegal to promote the Black Lives Matter movement within schools. I'm sure when they debated the business in the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Conservatives were queuing up to be right behind Black Lives Matter. So I think there's a bit of a disjunction there.
Yeah.
But what's going on in schools? I mean, who knows? I've heard a few stories of so-called lessons on the topic, but I'm sure if we could be a fly on the wall in a lot of classrooms in Scotland, it would be horrified at what's being taught.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I wrote an article about the kind of affirmative action through the back door, because I mean, affirmative action was never something that Britain subscribed to. America developed affirmative. In fact, it was Nixon, ironically, who first developed affirmative action, partly to sort of undermine the liberation movement of black people, as it happens. But affirmative action's never really been part of what we've done in Britain. But now, increasingly, you find, so that I was talking to a neighbour, and he explained that his son had gone for an engineering job with one of the oil companies, and there'd been thousands of people had applied for this job. He'd got an interview, one of 15, and he turned up, and this was the first interview, and every other person there was 11 of them. Everyone was this for an engineering job. Everyone was a woman apart from him. And he said on his engineering course, he'd never seen a woman on his engineering course. So he thought this was very peculiar. Then he went for a job with a major bank, and he described the interview where there was 10 of them. He says, I was the token white man at the interview process. So clearly these major companies are choosing people based on gender and ethnicity. And you think, well, when did that become an acceptable practice? Because, I mean, again, the fact that this young lad would say, without any irony or kind of encouragement, I was the token white guy. he obviously already knows the script, and that's a really unhelpful situation as far as I can see. This is not the way to try and create equality. It's through these artificial, manufactured form of discrimination. It's unhelpful in my opinion.
It's just a formula for resentment, isn't it? The whole idea of social justice is a contradiction. Justice can only apply to individuals. So if you want a system that's fair, it's got to be fair at an individual level, and that's what's going out of the window. They think the group identity becomes the important thing, and they start making decisions. I mean, the Equality Act has a provision to allow for positive discrimination in employment, and I think as time goes on, they're talking about like publishing race pay gaps. That's on its way, isn't it? I think Theresa May introduced that. I think that hasn't been rescinded, so that's going to come forward. So companies will be publishing their race pay gaps. And so there's going to be the same sort of pressure with the gender pay gap. Oh no, we've got to get someone from this continent promoted. We've got to get them up the tree. And people realize what's going on. I say it's just a recipe for resentment. That's also putting people in a mindset where it's very easy to exploit their frustration and turn them down who knows what roads.
Well, it's horrible, as you say. It's so divisive, and as far as I'm concerned, what you want people to have a sense of unity. To look at a black person and not see a black person, to just see a human being. To look at a woman, not see a woman. In terms of work and all the rest of it. They're a human being. You think they should be treated equally, and this actually undermines that mindset. It directly confronts that mindset and creates a sense where there is actually a new us and them. And you look at you'll probably know this you'll look at the Scottish website more than I do, but this term whiteness is now popping up. If you look through their documents, so they talk about whiteness, and they're adopting this kind of like social justice warrior language in the centre of the Scottish Parliament, where being white is starting to be seen as the way people used to talk about black. You think, well, how helpful is this? This is not helpful. Yeah.
Well, the Scottish Parliament, so many of them, there's no evidence of them having any sort of independent thinking. Whichever way the wind's blowing, that's the way they'll bend, and they'll go with the flow. So whatever the latest fashionable terms are, fashionable ideas are, then that's what you'll hear the speeches full of in the Scottish Parliament. I mean, it's depressing. There's like no resistance to this sort of ideology at all. When I watched their debate when they were talking about the Black Lives Matter movement, each time a Conservatives get up, I don't know why I thought this. This is a bit delusional of me, but I was thinking maybe we're going to get a different line here from this person, but absolutely not. All absolutely straight down the line with it. And the same ideology has been taught in schools as well. I did a video about modern studies recently. I mean, this is the content that's taught in modern studies. You study these inequalities, and then these are obviously a problem. Then you look at the different ways the government can try and solve this problem, and you try and assess which out of these methods is the best way. But it's taken for granted that every statistical every deviation from exact proportion is evidence of some sort of problem that the state needs to solve. And it's taught from school. If you're going to be registered with some sort of professional body, they might well demand it of you. If you're going to be working for the government, they might demand it of you in one way or another. It's the state ideology. I mean, it is almost a religion substitute, but it's so all-consuming in so many aspects of Scottish life, and the lack of resistance to it. I say it's depressing. That it seems almost everyone in Scotland's got a reason to keep their head down and go with the flow.
Yeah,
so it seems like that's what happens.
I just think there's a problem with politics at the minute. That the political parties are profoundly non-representative of people and around these issues. And that's what's been interesting about Trump, about Brexit, about various things that have happened over the last, sort of like 4, 5, 6 years. That there's kind of this suddenly this problem or aspect of these problems have suddenly emerged, and you're starting to get a sense that there is at least a greater sense amongst some people anyway that there's something needs to happen. I mean, I'm expecting over the next 2, 3, 4 years, I think there'll be all sorts of political parties start springing up.
There already are.
All sorts of, yeah, popping up. The Reclaim Party, Lawrence Fox's things going on. There's others. I know there's a Scottish group of people trying to get together that are kind of the pro-independence but against all of this, the hate crime stuff and all of these measures. So it'll be, politics could be interesting over the next 2 or 3 years. Whether we'll be able to break the bubble, I think the Scottish national question is so divisive as well, unfortunately, that it just means that people go, well, I feel Scottish and I'd like to be independent, so everything else I'll just ignore for the minute. Ignore. By the end of it, what have you got left?
I think the regional list voting ballot papers in the election next year, they're going to be absolutely enormous. They're going to have to come rolled up, I think, because there's going to be so many new parties that are popping up. I still think in the crowded field, the family parties is still unique. You mentioned Reclaim, Lawrence Fox's party. I would say that they're the sort of anti-woke culture war party. So that's what they're against.
Yeah.
But I would say we've got a lot of positive things as well. We've got a vision for a better society rather than just trying to stop this sort of madness in its tracks. But anyway, that brings us on to another thing we were going to talk about. Now, I think it's really important that we all remember our guests on this show are just fallible human beings. So they might not agree with the family party on every single issue. So I've asked Stuart to pick a policy or two that he would pick from our policies that he disagrees with, and we can have a little chat about that. So Stuart, fire away. You mentioned a couple. Which one do you want to start with?
Yeah, well, my two. It's not the second one's not a. The second one's more interesting, I think. But my first one, I'm pro-abortion, so I think that should be a woman's right to have an abortion. But the more interesting one, I think, is whether the family is the basis for being able to develop a politics, I suppose. Whether it's the framework for developing a common sense of being that ends up taking a political form, which I say very abstractly, and I say partly because I had this discussion with somebody about 10, 15 years ago when, trying to look at where politics might go. And this point was raised to me about, why the family, what's the basis of unity? Because historically, the basis of unity was class. Essentially, the Labour Party was the party of the labouring class. The Conservative Party represented kind of business interests and more middle class interests and so on. So whether the family is a framework for developing politics, I don't know.
The main thing I'd say to that is that every party has to choose a name, obviously. And if you think about the other parties, how well does their name encapsulate their manifesto, if you like? So if you think of the Green Party, I mean, what percentage of their time is spent on specifically green issues? As far as I can tell, a pretty low percentage. Like Labour, would anyone say, oh, you're the Labour Party? But no, you're not interested in unemployed people as well. So you have to pick a name, but no one name encapsulates the whole range of policies that you're going to cover. So for the family party, we choose them, but quite a lot of our policies are related to family. And also in Scotland, there's a big issue of state interference in family life. And a lot of our sort of socially conservative issues do relate to family structure, letting families make their own decisions, bringing up children, etc. So we thought that did cover quite a range of our policies. The other thing with it is it sounds benign. Not that we're trying to cover anything up, not like we're actually really nasty, but we thought this would be a good mask to wear. But just in general terms, you would think family would have positive connotations to virtually everyone. So we thought from that point of view, it would be a good name. I mean, we struggled in the sense that there wasn't a one or two words we could put in that would communicate to people what we're about. Like if you call yourself the Green Party, someone might go into that polling booth having never encountered the Green Party before, but they just know, oh, Green, I know what that's all about. I'll vote for them. Whereas for us, probably the best description would be maybe, socially conservative. You wouldn't be allowed that in any case because it's too similar to the Conservatives. But people generally don't understand what that is.
Yeah. So
it's hard to have a name that really encapsulates what we stand for. But that's why we went for family in the end.
There's a difficulty in fact, not only when you just describing the parties there. I mean, it's not only a problem of does Labour represent blah blah and all the rest of it, but because when the Labour Party was named, it meant a lot because people understood what the Labour Party was, and it encompassed, this is the party of the working class. It's the party that's defending ordinary people. It's a party that relates to unions and collective strength and decent pay and challenging the employers and so there's a whole framework that existed that was understandable. The Conservative Party, they protect, they wanted to conserve, they wanted to have a sense of the past, of Britishness, of the monarchy, and so the name in itself, there was a tradition and it meant something. And the worst one of all, I suppose, is the Liberal Party, because that related to a liberal tradition, which was understanding. You could explain what liberalism was because it was an ism. Whereas now the Liberals are illiberal. Mm-hmm. Right? The Labour Party has got nothing to do with Labour, and the Conservative parties aren't conservative. Mm-hmm. So the language of politics is completely screwed up. I mean, totally screwed up, which makes it really difficult because, it's almost like we don't actually have a new language yet because society hasn't developed, new movements haven't emerged and all the rest of it, that where you actually can find a name, because you can't just invent a name out of nothing. It would have to come out of society and come out of the kind of anxieties and so on. So it is, I appreciate it's very difficult at the minute to work.
The concept of conservatism, I said socially conservative, but that makes sense in the context where you assume that within the recent past, people remember something that was better in some way, and you wanted to conserve aspects. I mean, we're getting beyond that now. We're not trying to conserve the establishment. We're the anti-establishment party. Whereas conservatism is associated with maintaining the status quo, which we're absolutely not. So the term conservatism is outdated as well. So like you say, you're left struggling for words to choose to describe yourself. So a lot of new parties seem to pick words that don't really have any meaning in terms of political ideology. They just try and communicate some sort of dynamism or sense of mission or whatever, even though it's not very clear what the mission is.
Yeah. Well, it's like I often, at least, I say it and then I sort of have to then rethink it, because I often describe the modern elites as being conservative. Right. Uh-huh. What I mean by that is that they're kind of they want to. Historically, it was a more conservative imagination that wanted to put limits on things. Uh-huh. So liberals wanted change, conservatives wanted the status quo. But the thing about today is that it's not that they want the status quo, so conservatives doesn't work, but they want to regulate and control everything. Right? Mm-hmm. They have that instinct, but it's not a conservative instinct. It's a new, different, weird type of desperate need to sort of control and regulate, manage everything. Mm-hmm. So again, what's the word for that? I'm not entirely sure what the word is.
Yeah, that's interesting. Right, moving to the other issue, to the abortion issue. You said about a woman's right to choose. I would say with this, that's got to be secondary. That's going to be the secondary point. Because the first point that needs to be established is that this is something that we should regard as a valid choice, rather than a grave moral issue. So that one needs to be settled first. Once that one's settled, then whether a woman should have a right or not, that follows on from the moral question. So I suppose I would ask, what's your view on the moral status or the value of human life around the start of life?
I would say that until a child is free of the mother, then it's the mother who has a life, and the child doesn't exist. The child is a fetus that's an extension of the woman.
So free from the mother in terms of being born.
Yeah.
So you think the value, but as soon as the child's born, it becomes of value one human life, which is huge value.
Yeah.
So there's like not quite instantaneous, but there's a very rapid change in the value of this being within like the 5 minutes before being born and being born.
Yeah.
What's the sort of philosophical basis for that? How can the value of something change so dramatically due to its position?
Well, prior to that, it's through the woman that fetus lives, and for you to determine that child has to live and she cannot abort it, you are taking away her moral capacity to manage her own body and her own existence. And so for you to try and you become the state dictating to a woman what she can and cannot do to her body, which is immoral. And the child, as long as the child is inside that woman, the woman has to make that moral decision, and the state should not be forcing women to carry children that they don't want to.
So using the word child, so you're saying that the woman's right to choose takes precedence over the life of the child? Or we could put it another way. If you
do you at least accept that you are undermining the moral independence of a woman if you force her to have a child? And you might say that's worthwhile, but you are doing that.
I wouldn't use the word moral independence. It's restricting the choices. Yes, the same way that the law against murder restricts people's choices.
Surely your moral capacity must be at least in part related to your physical self and your body. It's your conscience and your body. You wouldn't support the state having the right to determine what you believe. Well, nor should you have the right of the state to determine what you do with your body. That's undermining the moral capacity and framework for the individual. But you might not like that, and you might not like the fact that means that that does not become a child. But otherwise, you are being dictatorial over every woman.
But it isn't the woman's body. I mean, you referred to the child before and after birth. This is where they call the fetus, unborn child, whatever. The fact is that that's a living human being, and therefore is of huge value. And we don't normally think that other factors are sufficient to give people the right to end another human life. We don't normally think there are things we could put on the other side of the scales that justify that. And I don't think there are in this case either. Because it's interesting that you move to the rights of the woman, the infringements of the freedom of the woman, rather than focusing on the key issue. The key issue is the moral status and worth of the unborn child.
Well, that's the key issue for you, because that gives your argument strength. You don't want to touch the woman issue, which is the prior issue, because it undermines your sense of moral goodness, because you realize that you're being dictatorial by forcing women to have children that they don't want. They no longer have control over their own physical being, which is immoral and illiberal.
So in what sense is the unborn child within the woman? In what sense is that her body? In what sense is that her physical being?
Well, in every sense, it's part of her.
But it's a new life, then, isn't it?
It will be if it's born. If it's not born, then it's not.
So you think it goes from sort of zero moral worth to full value as a human being?
No, it's got lots of moral worth in terms of, nobody celebrates an abortion.
Well, some people do, but yeah, most people don't.
Well, normal behavior is not to celebrate. It's not to see that this is a great thing. It's a very difficult thing. It's a thing that women will, some women will just find, they just have to do it pragmatically, and other women will feel tortured by it because it's a very difficult decision. And yes, we attribute obvious moral worth because this is another potential human being, but it is a potential human being, not a human being. It's a potential human being, unless if you are prepared to stop women having abortions, you have to at least accept that you are being illiberal and authoritarian in relation to those women. Now, you might say that that's worth it because you can see that if you think every fetus is a death or it's God's creation or something, then that's fine. That's up to you. I mean, I'm not religious. I don't see a fetus in the same way. Perhaps that's something to do with it. But to stop women having abortions would be profoundly authoritarian, in my opinion.
Okay, you talked about potential and actual human beings. I mean, is a newborn baby a human being?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's just a matter of location.
Well, it's about it's about the mother. It's about whether the mother wants to have that child or doesn't want to have that child.
Okay, how about if the child's just been born? Very limited cognitive capacity, no life plans, no memories, and the mother decides she doesn't want the child. You'd obviously be horrified at the thought of infanticide just after birth, would you?
Yeah.
So 5 minutes after is murder, 5 minutes before, there's no issue.
It's all about whether you are prepared to be authoritarian in relation to women. And you might not like that decision. You might think it's the wrong decision. You might think it's the immoral decision, but you are being authoritarian if you force women to carry children. And that's just the reality of it. And it's a difficult choice. But in the world that I think you should live in, you should not be able to force any living, breathing, independent human being to do something against their will. That is authoritarian. And to do what you are describing is to be authoritarian. And it's very difficult, and you can try and find this 5 minutes. But the bottom line is that is what you would be forcing women to be. You would be forcing women to have children against their will, which is illiberal and wrong.
Yeah, I would say that's the secondary issue. The first issue is to establish a sound ground for the value or non-value of the human life. I think we've covered that. That was interesting. I don't want to get the last word if you feel I'm doing that. Do you want to say anything?
No, that's fine.
That's leave it there.
Well, we were always going to disagree, so that's fine.
Well, thanks very much, Stuart, for coming on. It's always interesting to hear what you've got to say. So maybe you'll come back another day and share some thoughts with you. So we look forward to reading more of you in the Herald. Great to speak to you tonight. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Richard.
Right. Good night, everyone.
Bye.